Um, this is Shari Keller. She spent a long time with the mandali. She grew up in a big Baba family. And so she's here to tell you a little bit about her experiences. Just spend time with the mandali and watching some Babas.
And this is my daughter, Nadia. Jai Baba. I'm so happy to be here and have this opportunity to talk with you all. It's such a wonderful Baba opportunity. So just to give you all some background, I'm Darwin and Jeanne Shaw's granddaughter, and Leatrice was my mother. And I'd like to tell you some stories of growing up in a Baba family and having time with the monthly, as Nadia said. But to give you some kind of context for how that came about, I'd like to share with you how Darwin heard about Baba in the beginning. Many of you probably read his book or listened to his talks, but just the stories that I heard growing up were that when he was in his early teens and early 20s, he was really a seeker, and he had this profound feeling inside himself that he was destined to meet the Christ in this lifetime. He honestly felt deeply inside himself that the Christ was coming again and he would meet him. So he was searching. He went out west, he became a cowboy, he was an actor in a play or in a Hollywood movie. He went back to Schenectady, New York. He got married, and they had a small child. And in the spring of 1932, there were a series of very small, like about 1 or 2 inch little columns in the Schenectady Gazette, the newspaper, just saying that Sri Meher Baba was making plans to come to the West. And just hearing Baba's name, something just kind of triggered something in his mind, and he started thinking, this is significant, I should keep tabs on this. And I don't remember exactly how it went, but over a series of maybe a few weeks, these tiny little articles appeared, until one appeared that said that Baba was at Harmon-on-Hudson. And he was like, oh my gosh, this is it. I must get myself there. It's like 130 miles away from where I live. This is profound. And he told his parents, he told his wife, and she agreed immediately that he must go. And you all know that Baba changes his plans a lot. So even though Darwin went there during the dates that Baba said he'd be there, Baba had changed his plans and had already left for California. But at that time when he got there, somebody suggested to him that he write a letter to Baba. And the moment that he realized he could write to Baba, he felt this inner connection. He felt Baba inwardly was also contacting him, and it made this link. And from that moment, that connection was real to him. So he did not meet Baba in 1932. He came back home. He told his parents, Aaron and Helen Shaw. They also intuitively felt Baba was the second coming of Christ, just like that. And so what started happening was a small group of people, and quickly growing group of people, were busy talking about Baba and connecting with each other and writing letters and telling each other about what Baba was doing. So immediately it wasn't that he was thinking about this in isolation. He was immediately in this network of people excited to talk about Baba and meet him and find out anything and everything they could about Baba. And so he thought to himself, okay, there'll be another time, I'll wait. And they waited 2 years, and in 1934, I believe it was December of 1934, my mother was an infant. His parents watched over their now 2 children, and then Jeanne and Darwin Shaw went to New York City to meet Baba in person on his next trip. And so, long story short, they met Baba in physical form. My grandmother on certain occasions described her experience of meeting Baba as not even seeing Baba, but seeing light. Just seeing light and just having this complete experience of just the joy. and love. And it was so profound, and they felt such a deep heart connection that there was nothing else. There was no other reality for them at this point. And so they met with Baba, and from that point on, it would be another 18 years before they would see him again. But what again became even more busy and active was this network of people who were busy telling each other about Baba, and they'd get cables from Mani, they'd get information from India. And back then, they didn't have social media, but I love this, and I only recently discovered this because I have all of Darwin and Jeanne's boxes, and I was going through them yet again. My husband and I had combed through them really carefully, or so we thought, because Darwin and Jeanne never threw anything out. And this was just a few years ago that I was going through them again. And I was going through one particular box with electric bills in it, and I thought to myself, okay, honestly, really, there's not going to be any Baba stuff in this box, because it's literally electric bills from the 1930s. But what I discovered amidst the electric bills was these tiny little, like, quarter-size envelopes with what was the 1930s and 40s version of social media, notes that they would send through the post, like this size. But they were sending them constantly to other Baba lovers with little, just like 2 sentences about what was happening in the next event and the next plan of how to get together and what Baba was doing. And it was happening all the time. There were so many of these tiny little notes. And then, on top of the notes, which were pretty good, I also came across this letter that Quentin Todd had written when Baba was in Portofino in the early 30s, and written that Baba had dictated to him to send to Darwin. And so I came across this letter, also amidst the electric bills. You know, I haven't thrown that box out yet, because I'm still really concerned that there's more stuff in the electric bill box. And it was signed by Baba, literally signed by Baba, Yama Sarani. And I was just blown away by this. But I was also blown away by the intimacy and excitement that came across while I was sitting up there in my very hot attic going through these boxes. But what came across was just this joyous feeling and excitement of all these people across New England area, out to California, in England, all the way to India, and you could feel the connections. It felt alive. And then I came across I think it was 1941, Baba sent out a list, I think it was about a list of 30 orders to a number of Western men, and Darwin was among those. And at the time, my mother was 7 years old. And why this was significant, so he was very particular. He sent out a list of orders, but then they weren't blanket orders. They were typed out and numbered. They were very specific, all numbered, you know. But he also sent out a separate letter to each person telling them which ones they should follow. So Darwin's letter was like, you need to follow order 7, 8, 10, 20, but if 20 is too hard, you can skip 20. And it went with that. And then one of the numbers, which was significant for my mother, was, it said, for 1 year you are not to touch or have any physical contact with any female over the age of 6. And my mother was 7. Her younger sister was 5. So you would imagine that a 7-year-old might be upset about that. But my mother told the story that she was elated by this because it meant she got to participate in an order Baba had given. Because what it meant was she had to also consciously not touch her father. She couldn't run up to him spontaneously and hug him. She couldn't touch him at the dinner table or hold his hand when they're going to the park. She couldn't do those things. She had to think about, but in her child mind, she thought, I'm doing something that is part of Baba's order. And that changed her perception of her connection to Baba as a child. And so that was a significant turning point for her. So my mom obviously grew up in a Baba household. So she, her first 18 years of life, Darwin had asked Baba's permission early on to have meetings at their house in Schenectady, New York. So that went on through her whole childhood. And then in 1952, as you probably all know, Baba came to Myrtle Beach. And so the 5 of them, so by that point there were 3 kids, and my mom was 18. They all went down to Myrtle Beach to meet Baba. Backing up a little bit, Darwin and the whole family in 1949 had spent a year living at Yupon Dunes to help construct the center and help Elizabeth. And prior to that, also really interesting and something I didn't realize until recently, was that in 1947, Darwin's parents, does this still work? No. Do I have to talk loud now? Okay. In 1947, 2 years before this, Darwin's parents, who had not yet met Baba, but who back in the early 30s had instantly also taken Baba to be God, and had participated in all of the exchange of letters and excitement. They had been asked by Elizabeth to go down and stay at Yupon Dunes in 1947, and Aaron Shaw helped dredge the lagoon at the Baba Center at that time. And they spent a year, and then they switched places. They went back to Schenectady, and Darwin and Jeanne and the family went down, and Darwin continued working. So I just kind of liked knowing that, my great-grandfather, who I obviously never met, did this, and I just liked knowing that. But anyway, so when my mom met Baba, the 5 of them, the 5 Shaws met Baba in the lagoon cabin together. My mom was 18. She had the presence of mind, having taken shorthand classes in high school, to take a little steno pad, which was like this big, and a pencil to take shorthand notes while meeting Baba, which just is kind of amazing. But what Baba first asked her at age 18, and you all who've been to the center know that there's a freshwater lake on the center with alligators in the lake. So Baba put it to her, "Would you jump in the lake?" And she's just, literally having just met Baba. And she says, "Yes, Baba." And then he pushes a little bit more and he says, "With the alligators?" And she says, "Yes, Baba." And she's thinking, "Yeah, I will. Yes, I will do that." But then he pushes further and he says, "Is that yes or just yes?" And then in her heart, she thinks, "Okay, this is it. Baba's like no joke here. This is really it." And she says, "Really, yes, Baba." And at that point also, she felt inwardly, if he asked her in that second to walk out there, she would do it. And it was a very significant thing for her, because growing up in a Baba family, as a child, it seems so natural and everything feels like, of course you would do this. And it's not that it's passive, it's not that loving Baba is passive, but it maybe doesn't call on you to actively, consciously, with that weight of what it takes, somebody who it finds Baba out of the mundane world. But at that moment, being 18, when she agreed, my feeling was that it solidified in her this conscious, active, 100% for Baba as an adult. Like this, yes, this is my relationship to Baba. 100%. I am for Baba. So she had this experience, and at the end of her life, I do feel that he kind of came around again in his very Baba-like way and had her jump in the lake for him, symbolically. But that was her initial experience. And then through the 50s, they spent a lot of time with Baba. They traveled with him in the West, and Darwin went on the 3 Incredible Weeks. And then the 5 of them went to the East-West gathering in 1962. And one really wonderful, significant thing that I felt was really touching when I heard the story was one of the days during the darshan, it rained like spontaneously and heavily, and all of the Western women were soaked. And of course, they didn't have a change of clothes. And so Baba took it as an opportunity for, of course, it's named the East-West Gathering, mixing of East and West. And he asked the Eastern women and the women mandali to take the Western women and give them their dresses and their saris, their extra clothes. So Mara gave my mom a dress which fit her perfectly, and said to her, "You have to wear this after this occasion too, and you should use it. You should wear it. You shouldn't put it away." My mom put it away anyway. But she got to wear it, and I think all of the women, like this mixing of East and West, I think was so significant. And I think just hearing my mom tell that story was, I think, a real gift. Because, we're all, so many of us, Easterners, Westerners, have gone back and forth. Should I wait? Okay, so skipping ahead, that was 62. In 65, my father, Johnston, came into the picture. My parents were dating, they were still in upstate New York, and my father proposed to my mother. And she said, "I'll get back to you on that." And she did not give him an answer. And she didn't tell him why, but she immediately wrote to Baba. And she asked his permission to marry Johnston. And so he was in seclusion a lot during that time, so it took 3 months. And so she got a cable back from Baba 3 months later, and it said, "Go ahead with your marriage to Johnston." So she excitedly had the cable, so she went and told my dad, and she's like, "I can marry you now because Baba gave his permission." My dad was kind of like, "Oh, I'm starting to get this." He was not a Baba lover. He had heard, he'd gone to some meetings, he, met Darwin and Jeanne and all that. But I think at that point he was kind of like, "Oh, this is really serious. This is a whole different level of seriousness." And it took him a minute before he was like, "Is marriage still on the table after?" But they got married, and then in early 1967, when she was first pregnant with me, she again wrote to Baba, which was really wonderful because he sent a cable, and I still have the cable, and it says, "He sends his love blessings to the little one to come," which is really sweet and wonderful for me to know. So it's nice, even though I never met Baba in physical form. And then, so this was all still in upstate New York, and there were, at this point, hundreds of people coming to weekly meetings that the Shaws have been having since the mid-30s. So decades worth of weekly Baba meetings, and people driving sometimes from hundreds of miles away. So the feeling and the atmosphere and the intensity of all these Baba meetings and conversations about Baba, you can imagine, it was like having a party that just never ended, basically. And so my dad in 1971 got a job in Las Cruces, New Mexico, which is A, the middle of nowhere, and B, extremely deserty. It makes the Rajasthan desert look green. It's so deserty. So they moved there with me, and sight unseen, my dad bought the house and drove us there, and my mom landed in the middle of nowhere away from the Baba world in her mind. And she was just stunned and thinking, "Okay, Baba, how am I going to find you here? How can I find something here to make me feel connected to you?" And the thing that happened was such an incredible thing. Las Cruces is in the middle of nowhere, except that it is on Highway 10, which is an interstate highway that connects Myrtle Beach to Los Angeles. And in the early 70s through the 80s, Baba lovers were in droves, because there were all these young Baba lovers who were in their 20s who were just finding out about Baba and super excited, and they were going between Myrtle Beach and the Los Angeles Baba Center, kind of nonstop. So it was like a traffic, it was just nonstop. And so my parents' house was like a pit stop on the way. So here, what my mom thought was going to be this middle of nowhere turned out to be an oasis. And all these Baba lovers came through. So this was my early childhood through my teens. They would all stop at our house, and she would always ask their Baba story, like how did they come to Baba? Because they all, early 20s, coming out of the 60s, the hippie generation, the whole thing. They always had a Baba story that was really profound. And me as a child I was in awe of their Baba stories. Because growing up in a Baba family, what was happening for me as a 4 and a 5-year-old and a 6 and all the way up was I was realizing that so many of you were also seekers, and people heard Baba's name. They recognized Baba out of the mundane world of illusion. They recognized truth, and it rang true so deeply in their hearts that they became Baba lovers. Even after Baba had dropped his body, it didn't matter. They were on fire for Baba. They were lit up. You could feel the love pouring out of them. We'd never met them before. They came to our house. They told their Baba stories. I was so excited, story after story, and they'd ask my mom, and she would share her Baba stories. My dad would he had the role of getting out the film projector and setting up the screen and showing Baba movies, and he'd stand dutifully back. But it was again, like Baba just created the possibility of all of this sharing of love and Baba stories and connection. And 2 things were happening for me. Was one, I was deeply thinking in myself, if I hadn't been born into a Baba family, what would it be like for me to live in the world? Would I recognize Baba's name as the name of God? And would I recognize the name of truth? Would I be able to step away from that illusion and find that truth in me if I weren't born into it? And that was a strong thing happening in me, but also at the same time happening in me as a really young child was me adamantly saying, I have my own connection to Baba. My connection to Baba is mine. And I felt it deeply. So I had 2 seemingly contrary streams of thought going through my mind as a fairly young child. And the year I was 6, I was ill for an entire year. I hardly went to school. I went to the hospital every other week. And during that time, what I did was play Baba music. We had records back then, and I would get up to turn the record over for a year. And I listened to, the early 70s Baba songs. And it was my time as a young child to make this deep connection that was, I felt, my way of being more consciously aware that I was choosing, and obviously Baba was choosing me, but I felt that there was a shift in me of my conscious mind saying, this is my life. And it was a deeply meaningful year for me. Actually, I didn't care about whether I missed school or not, and it sounds funny because I was quite ill, but what I remember from that year was listening to Baba music. And at the end of the year, I was fine. It lifted just as fast as it happened, and I was fine. The other thing that was also happening through my childhood was my mom would take me to Myrtle Beach and plan a trip so it coincided with my grandparents coming to the Baba Center. So every year we'd be on the Baba Center, and back in those days there weren't a lot of other kids. So I was I was basically the only kid most of the time. And back then, Jim Meyer and Bob Brown were working on the Baba Center, and they were cleaning cabins while writing Baba songs. like on a daily basis. It was kind of an amazing time. And like one time Jim Meyer told a story of how he like found Bob's like lyrics crumpled up in a trash can, and he was like, "Whoa, these are good." But then they try out their songs that they'd written like that day or were new in the original kitchen in the evening. And my grandparents and my mom and me and, I'm sure it was a handful of other people would sit and hear like new Baba songs. And I'd be this little kid twirling around dancing to the Baba songs. And it was magic. It was absolutely magic. And it had the same feeling. These new Baba lovers would come to the center and they would be welcomed. Elizabeth was there. They would be instantly welcomed with this hug and this Jai Baba as though they'd found long-lost family. And it was just this instant celebration of like this recognition that you too, you found God, you found Him, we're here. And the excitement and happiness was like explosive. And here I am, this little kid watching it, and the adults are talking and the important things and everything, but I'm just this kid feeling it. And I loved feeling it. It was exciting to me. It was the most magical place in the world to me. And I grew up hearing all of my family's stories of being on the Baba Center and where they met Baba. And so when I'm on the Baba Center, what happens for me is it's not just the lagoon or cabin or the barn or the original kitchen. Every one of those places is infused with the stories of my family being with Baba. So when I'm in the barn, I think of the time in the story how my mom described when Baba was sitting in the barn and it was packed with people, and he had Begin the Begin played for him. And my mom was sitting there, my aunt was there, they were quite young in their 20s, and she tells the story of how when the lyrics say, "Darling, I love you," that Baba turned just to her and his eyes twinkled magically looking at my mom. She told that story one time, I think it was at the LA Sahabas, and my aunt was there. They were both telling Baba stories. And then my aunt was hilarious. She turned to my mom and she said, "Leatrice, that's my story. That's Baba looked at me." And the thing was, Baba looked at, we found out many people in the audience, in different directions, in different places in the audience, had the same experience of just at that moment. They felt Baba looked directly at them, and that love glance was personal and intimate and for them. But I think of that when I go to the barn, and I think about how it sounded when the dancers danced for Baba in the barn, and the sound their ballet shoes must have made on the wood floor. And what it was like when the young people, and now there's the youth sahabas, but I'll tell you this, in 1952, the original youth group was the Alligator Club. And Leatrice and Renee and their brother Lowell were three of the earliest members of the Alligator Club, and I believe a number of the dancers were also members of the Alligator Club. So they would meet, and they would share stories of Baba from that day. Oh, incredible, right? Just completely incredible. And they would sit down at the picnic table near the boathouse and talk and wait until they were called to see Baba. And then one time Baba asked my aunt, she's tall, relatively speaking, meaning she was taller than Baba. He asked her to lead the way from the original kitchen up over the bridge and up the other side. Because she was tall, she could clear the cobwebs. So he asked her to do that, which she felt quite honored to do, it was a gift for her. But I think of that story when I'm on the center, and, just 100 other tiny, tiny moments. Like the Baba Center is alive, and it's charged. Like, the thing about the Baba stories is we can say they existed in the past, but when you're remembering them in the present, they are present. Baba's love is present. You're reliving them right now, in the now. And, when I walk on the beach, I think about how the story my mom told of when Baba had the dancers carry his chair out into the ocean. They were walking toward the ocean, and everyone watched them walking further and further, and everyone was like, how far is that going to go? And they kept walking, and they kept walking, and they kept walking until Baba's feet were submerged in the ocean. And then he motioned for them to come back, and then they set his chair down on the beach. And then somebody at that time said, we need something to dry Bob's feet. And my mom was on it. She was like, I have this tiny little jacket, this cotton jacket that I'm wearing. I'm going to take this off. And she did. And she threw it in the direction so it would, reach whoever was close by. And they grabbed it and dried Bob's feet with her jacket. And what a wonderful moment for her. What a wonderful experience for her. It was so intimate and so personal to have these stories. And another time, Baba was asking them to find seashells. And she was walking along, and she was really worried that she couldn't find a good seashell, and she tried to find, beautiful seashells. And she showed a couple to Baba, and he was like, oh. And he made a face, and then she's thinking, oh God, I really have to find a better one. And finally, she found an appealing seashell, and then he was very pleased and did that. But so the whole Baba Center is full of magic and life and Baba's love, and it's present now. That's actually the reality. All these things, they don't just live in books and in the past. They're present, and that magic lives on in us. Baba's in us, and it lives on. So that was my childhood experience of being on the Baba Center. And then in '75, my mother and father and I first came to India, and there was no MPC, and we stayed at Vilu's, which was pretty magical, I have to admit, as a small child. It was, kind of the colonial British days. It was great, and just a mind-blowing experience landing in Bombay. Bombay was the first actual city that I'd ever been in, like anywhere. Like I hadn't been in a big city in the States either, so Bombay was my first city. And it was so novel, and I went from being scared and freaked out and not wanting to be in India at all for the first few days, and just, confused by everything. There was a beggar child on the street, and everything was just turning my world upside down, to being at Vilu's, and then later 4 days at Meherabad, and falling in love and never wanting to leave because it felt like I was home. And it was just, again, completely magical. We had full days at Meherabad with the mandali, and again, I was the only kid there, and I was just shy of turning 8 that summer. And Mani used to play with me. She'd do those shadow plays with me with her hands and make all the different animal shapes. And it felt like she spent hours. It felt like she was my best friend. I don't even know what all we said, but she'd sit on one of the benches on the veranda, the front veranda at Meherabad, and I'd just play with her. Erich would play with me. It literally just felt like my best friends. And I wrote a little play that I'm sure was terrible and made my dad act in it, and it had to do with a monkey. I can't remember, but all the mandali came and dutifully watched the 5-minute play. And my dad was very gracious about that. But it was just, again, like going from black and white to living in color. It was so charged and so full of love, and it felt also so natural, and especially as a child, I didn't have the thought of, I need to ask Erich deep, serious questions, and I need to solve things in my life. It was just natural. It just felt like love, and it felt like how love should feel. And I also, I saw fairies when I was a child. And I had seen them as a much younger child in our home, in our garden at home. And I'd kind of forgotten that I'd seen fairies by the time I was nearly 8. It had kind of faded away. But then at Meherabad, it came back. And in the Meherabad garden, the pot garden with all the flowers, it came back like 10 times. And you don't see fairies with your physical eyes, you see them internally. But it's not like imagining something. It's an experience of them, and it's an experience of, they're playful, they're mischievous, they're joyful. And the Indian fairies at Meherabad were like bright. They were like neon compared to anything I saw in the States. They were like lit up fairies, but they were also really mischievous. I had this sense that they were just like having a grand time. And I can't tell you what, like, it's not like I did anything. I just had this experience of kind of sitting there knowing about it. But it was magic, and it was lovely, and I never forgot it. And I don't even know that I had mentioned it, but I must have mentioned it, because one incredibly wonderful thing was that many, many years later, in the mid-90s, Mani had heard about this, and she called me to her room to ask me about the fairies that I had seen as a child. And I was blown away. It was so sweet. I had no idea that she'd known that and remembered all those years. It was basically 20 years later. And she sat with me on her bed in Mara and Mani's room. And it was just the two of us. And she asked me to tell her where at Meherabad I had seen the fairies, which locations, and asked me to describe them. And then she went on to tell me that her mother, which was Baba's mother, had seen fairies as a young child also. And that people did not believe her when she was telling her family that she saw fairies. And so each night the fairies would come and give her a small gift and leave it in her room. But her parents thought she was making up stories. So the story, as Mani told it to me, was that one night, so this went on for quite some time, that she was seeing fairies and her parents weren't really on board with that. And they locked the door and they said, okay, now let's see if the fairies come. So the next morning, there were a set of tiny, tiny, tiny bells that the fairies had left. And then, of course, her mom did believe her, that the fairies visited her. So Mani was telling me this. I was completely, I was hardly keeping it together because it was just magical. And she started describing this, I don't know if it was her own experience or like she just started describing what it was like and she used the term celestial music and celestial like sounds and smells and sights of flowers. And she got this faraway look on her eyes, and she was painting a picture with her hands of describing these sounds and the beautiful music, but she used the term celestial music. And just her description of the rose smell and the beauty of it, and her face was so radiant. And at one point, her eyes were closed, and it was just like the love pouring out of her was so beautiful. And she, how Mani was, and she was describing all this and the heart quality, and I'm just sitting there, like on the bed next to her, thinking, how is it? I'm so lucky to be the one sitting there next to her. And maybe the whole thing lasted 10, 15 minutes, and then she turned to me, and, I can't even remember, I know I have it written down back at home, but it was so beautiful and just such a charged experience. And then she held my cheeks in her hands and kissed my face, and she was looking into my eyes. It was just one of the, most wonderful experiences of my life. So it was very nice that she shared this experience of fairies with me. So where am I in my story? So in 75, my mom and I were sitting outside the trust compound on one of the benches just outside the trust office, and we were sitting with Erich. So I was, back to my 8-year-old self, and Erich was playing those hand games. He had all these hand games that he would play, like you're trying to find, anyway. And so he turned and asked me, when are you coming back? When will you be back? And I spontaneously said 10 years. And then my mom inwardly was like, oh my gosh, really? And Eric's just like, okay, 10 years. And I don't remember having said that. My mom only told me, but it actually was 10 years when we came back. So it was 1985, and we came back, and I was really busy thinking my 18-year-old self thoughts and ready to go off to school. And we had tea with Mira, like I'm sure so many of you have, and it was, I'm sure as everyone who's had tea with Mira, it was just this very intimate, beautiful experience, because again, for Mira, and even having the opportunity to watch Mira, Baba's present for her. It's not a memory. Baba's present. And so I had the good fortune to sit directly across from Mira at the table. And Baba's seat is here. So for those of you who haven't been there, so it's quite a big table, and Mira's seat was here, Baba's chair was here, and I sat directly across, and on the wall is this beautiful picture of Baba. And he just looks glorious and ethereal. So before the tea, Mira had no thought really about the food. She was only thinking of Baba and places set for Baba. And so she got up as though we didn't exist really for her. And she got up and she went to the photo and she traced the line of Baba's image and his form. And she kissed the image. But in this moment that she's doing this, you felt that Baba was literally present. It wasn't an empty chair in the room. This wasn't a symbolic thing. Baba was present. And it again made me realize that this thing that we call time, and thinking that these are just memories and Baba doesn't live among us now, is not the case. Baba lives in us and among us right now. And you could experience that with Mira. I don't even remember drinking the tea. I just remember how focused her entire being was, focused on her beloved. And that focus makes him present in all of us. And that was my biggest experience on that trip. And then through the 90s, I got to come to Meherabad a lot. And then toward the late 90s, I was meant to do this research project in Hyderabad. And I had planned it for a couple years, and I had this grant, and I was down there, and everything was failing. Everything was going so badly. I was just like, I don't know what to do. So I took an overnight train to Pune to come to Meherabad, because I was like, okay, this isn't working. I need to go to Meherabad. What can I do? I can't hit my head against a wall. So I came, and I immediately thought, well, I should volunteer, because I hope that I'm here a long time, because I really don't want to go back and attempt my research. So Steve Klein asked me if I would help BalNatu edit conversations. And it was one of the greatest gifts of my life to do that. BalNatu was just a very self-effacing, quiet man. He was very scholarly also, and he would debate a word choice for, maybe half an hour. He had a 4-inch Sanskrit dictionary on his desk. He had an Urdu dictionary, even though he didn't read Urdu, but he had multiple dictionaries. He loved this kind of work. He loved language. He loved wordplay. And one of the things that in helping him edit conversations became really clear was many people, they're vignettes that read like stories of just a short story of being with Baba or being with your beloved. And they're written in a way that's very relatable for Westerners. And during that time, a number of people came to him and asked, were these real? And he never really knew how to answer that, because what they were asking is, did this happen in person? And the answer was, no, they didn't happen in person, but the other answer is, yes, they were real. They were 100% real. And the reason they were real, the reason you can say that, is what Bal was doing was, again, he was so busy remembering Baba that imagination and remembrance become the same thing, actually. When your beloved is you're so focused on your beloved, and your remembrance of it, of your beloved, becomes like imagination, because you're imagining, what Bal was doing was imagining Baba with him, imagining Baba having tea with him, imagining Baba sitting there when he was nervous about like packing his suitcase to go from Meherabad to Meherabad. He was talking to Baba. He was imagining, like so deeply, that he felt Baba's presence with him. And these vignettes came out of that experience. And sometimes he would feel inwardly that Baba said, maybe one or two sentences to him, or just a message to him. And he would take that idea, and just a kernel of an idea, and he'd create sort of a scene around the idea, just so that he could describe his beloved sitting with him and sharing this with him. And so that's how conversations got written. They got written piecemeal. Sometimes he'd have me or somebody else write a paragraph, and then I'd come back and he'd be like, what is this? I didn't say that. No, that's not, no, you didn't read my mind correctly. This was, no, not. And then it would all get scratched, and then we'd come up with another thing, and he would rework and rework and rework the scenery around the experience of Baba. The scenery was just so he could create the story. But what he was really getting at was that kernel of his inner interaction with Baba. So that's what was really real, and it really impressed on me at that time, like his devotion, but his inner practice of always being present with Baba. He made it so. And it was, again, just magic. Baba wasn't in the physical form, so he could have just said, it was in the past. But he made it his present through his remembrance and through this process that was both remembrance and imagination. And the other thing that he would do that was really incredible for me was he loved coincidences. And the word coincidence has 3 C's. And being a lover of wordplay, he would say, see, and he would mean like sight, see, or sometimes in Hindi he'd say, deko, and he'd get really excited, because BalNatu would get like very like jazzed, and he'd be like this, he had this like kind of personality. And so he gave me homework when I was helping him, and he'd say, because he was seeing CCCs all the time. Like, they were happening to him like 20 times a day. And he'd be like, CCC, one would happen, and they would go by me, and I'd be like, wait, what happened? What just happened? And he'd be, see, and he'd have to explain it to me. And then he'd like remind, he'd love to say, I had a Fulbright scholarship, and he'd say, dim bulb. She's not a Fulbright, she's a dim bulb. And it took me, it was cute though. It was sweet when he did it. So he gave me homework the homework was to find CCCs. Like, I was supposed to go back to the Pilgrim Center and in my own life, in regular life, find CCCs and then bring him the stories. And I went back and I was like, oh my gosh, these things happen to BalNatu. They don't happen to me. I'm not going to find CCCs. What am I going to report? And so the first couple times I came back and I'm racking my brains, and I was looking for big things. But what I was also realizing, and I'll get to that in a minute. So I had nothing to tell him, and he was like completely disappointed in me, and he kept giving me the same assignment to find CCCs and tell him. And so finally I realized, not only are they not big things, what they also are not is things that answer or meet our desires or expectations. Because we like to think of a coincidence as something working out that was secretly what I wanted, or maybe not working out, and so that's Baba's will too. But what he meant by CCCs is these small things in life where you hear something that somebody said, and it's Baba telling you you needed to hear that thing. It wasn't that you had a desire or an expectation. It was something that you needed to hear. And it's so small and so natural in the way it happens, and it's meant for you. And that's why they were happening all the time for BalNatu, because he was registering that they happen. And as soon as I figured it out, I was like, oh my gosh, they happen all the time. And then I told this story a couple years ago, and somebody said, well, do you have any examples? And then I was like, oh my gosh, no, we don't. But then today, so I was thinking about telling the story, and so like in the first half of today, I must have had 10 CCCs. I was just like, oh my gosh, I heard something at breakfast from somebody sitting in this room that touched me deeply, and I felt like, oh, I needed to hear that. I needed to consciously be aware of that. I heard something from somebody as I was walking after breakfast, and I needed to hear that. And like Baba is giving each one of us those small things all day long, every day. And they're not things that we desire. They're just things they're just these little sparks and kernels of things that are just so natural we miss them. And what BalNatu was doing was making a practice of remembering and recognizing them as the gifts from Baba. And that was really meaningful for me. I forget very often, but when I remember, it's pretty magical. Another thing that happened to me while I had the good fortune of helping BalNatu, Bal knew I just loved hanging out with Erich, and Erich was kind of my guy. And so Bal always said that I could sit with Erich at tea time. You know, and he'd be quite lenient and not ask me to come back until tea was fully over. So this one day we're hanging out by the blue bus, and Gary Kleiner's there, and he's talking, there's a bunch of people talking, and all this stuff is going on. And I'm just sitting quietly, and Erich hands me this document, and it's a trust document, like it's an official trust document. And I'm thinking, who am I? Why, you know? And he says, read it. And I'm feeling really like I'm not the person who should be handed a trust document. Who am I to even see this or read this? And so I'm dutifully reading it, feeling very much like you know, like I'm shouldn't be that person. So I'm reading it, and you know, it's thick, it's many pages, I'm not going to get through it in the time left. And then very uncharacteristically, BalNatu came, and he was in a mood, and he clapped really loudly, like, come now, we have work to do. And so I heard this clap, which he didn't usually do it that way. And I was startled, like, oh my gosh, I gotta go, but I've got this trust document. And so in this moment, I went to put the trust document down on the chair next to me. But instead of setting it down carefully, because I felt this pressure to move quickly, so I had it like this. I didn't toss it down, but as it got within a couple inches, I did this. I dropped it down carelessly. And the second it left my hand, it kind of fell like that. The second it left my hand, part of me went, oh, I wasn't careful. And I just cringed inside. And Erich, who was busy talking, and I didn't even know he had seen anything, he turned to me in a split second, and he said very seriously, but with a lot of compassion, this is something of Baba's work, and anything having to do with Baba's work must be handled with the utmost care. Never forget that. And I was so grateful, and it was so meaningful to be scolded by Erich. It really was. It was like this beautiful gift to be scolded, and you know, I never forgot that. And that was one of the nicest experiences with Erich, believe it or not. So yeah, he gave me that. So that was through the 90s. I met my husband. He was also in BalNatu's record room. Mark Keller was working with Bal for many, many years there. So we also worked on conversations and editing together, which was really a wonderful experience. So I think those are most of my stories. Yes. So thank you all. Jai Baba. Yes. It is my great grandfather. Aaron Cyrus Shaw is on the memorial tower. That was another thing. This is, yeah. So when the Shaws, so my great grandfather and his wife did meet Baba in 1952. They met Baba first before Darwin and Jeanne, actually, which was kind of an amazing thing. And when Darwin and Jeanne and their 3 kids met Baba, Baba said, all 5 of you love me. And at a later point in time, he told them, both fathers, meaning both Darwin's father and Jean's father, he said, both fathers loved me. And I think, my grandmother in particular felt that really touched her. And then, so her father, Jean's father, at the end of his life, this was again in Schenectady, New York, would take the bus across town and come over to Darwin and Jean's house because it was full of Baba treasures and Baba photos. And he would just sit in their living room with the Baba treasures and sit for an hour or 2, quietly, wouldn't say a word, and then he'd go home. So he did that toward the end of his life. It's very sweet.
There was, when you were saying that at the Myrtle Beach, the people were carrying Baba and he touched his feet. And something you had said when Baba said, I'm the ocean. What was that?
I don't have the exact quote, but that Baba, it was significant that Baba wanted his feet in the ocean. That like his quote is, I am the ocean of love, and that it was significant that his feet were submerged in the ocean. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank all of you.
अवतार मेहर बाबा की जय।
Jai. Avatar Meherabad ki